Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Susanna Williams. I am the chair and a founding board member of Our Revolution Contra Costa, and we are one of about 40 Our Revolution chapters across the state. And we launched in 2016, and our main goal is to support grassroots candidates from anything from a national level. We helped Bernie Sanders win in the state of California. We've helped get local candidates elected, Dinah Becton, Ellie Householder with the Antioch School Board, Joy Motz with the Antioch City Council, Paul Seeger, Diablo Water Board, and many, many more candidates and causes. It's basically up to us to work for Medicare for All, for the Green New Deal, for free college tuition, criminal justice reform, student loan forgiveness, and many other things. And tonight we're here to talk about the Green New Deal in the Bay Area. We have some amazing speakers. We have Mark Stemen from Chico Green New Deal. We have Ben Paulos, who is heading up the Berkeley Climate Action Fund. We have Massimo Lambert-Mullen, who is with the Sunrise Movement. And kicking things off, we have Jovita Mendoza. She's a resident in Brentwood, and she's going to give us an update on something that is has risen to the top and is pretty controversial. And I think people need to know more about it, which is the drilling project that is being considered for the area out there. And before we actually move on, I'm going to pass this over to one of my colleagues in a minute. I just want to say to all of the protesters on the front lines, we stand with you, we support you, stay safe, and even those of us who cannot be there, we support you behind the scenes and doing everything to make our words heard and your words heard. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kenji Hamada. He is also one of our board members with Our Revolution Contra Costa, and he has a few words about the land from which we are, I guess, broadcasting from. Kenji.
Thanks, Susanna. Yeah, we want to do a land acknowledgement, as you've probably heard at many other events before, which is just an acknowledgement of the original inhabitants of the land that we're on, which are here in the Bay Area, the Bay Miwok people here in central Contra Costa, and some Ohlone peoples in west Contra Costa. And we want to remember that the original inhabitants of this land are still with us. They have descendants in the present day. Their land was stolen from them. It was not handed over willingly, and we should remember that and have some sense of humility and remember whose land this really is.
Thank you, Kenji. And Mark, take it away. I believe you are on.
All right. Does this allow me to be heard?
Yes.
Very good. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, comrades and companions. Thank you all for being here tonight. We have a spectacular program of speakers this evening. Our last Zoom meeting was concerning Medicare for All. Tonight, we're going to discuss probably the most important legislative proposal in the last 30 years, the Green New Deal, and how we're going to bring the Green New Deal right here in the Bay Area. And I'm sure you're thinking, with so much happening right now, it may seem strange that we're going to be talking about environmental policy and the Green New Deal, but it isn't so strange. One of the things I've learned in politics is that every issue is connected to every other issue. And the crisis that we are facing as a nation and as a people, we are now in a period where an injustice, a murder was done in our name. There has been no response of accountability. We are entering a period where electoral politics offers people no hope, where you have two-party candidates who are unacceptable for different reasons. But the reason why that we are involved and that we stay involved, when George Floyd said, "I can't breathe," it doesn't matter if it's someone in Minneapolis with a knee on his neck by a cop saying, "I can't breathe." It doesn't matter if it's a child in Richmond living in the shadow of the refineries who has asthma saying that "I can't breathe," or if it's a child in Yemen being bombed with chemical weapons manufactured by the US government saying "I can't breathe." We have got to And now that we see that our nation is now under martial law, with tanks on our streets and helicopters in the air, what we do to others, we eventually do to ourselves. What we do overseas, we eventually bring home. And this is part of the discussion that we're going to be having this evening. This is part of a system of injustice, a system of indifference, a system of corruption, both moral and civic, fossil fuel industry, prison industrial complex, military industrial complex, all interlocking systems of oppression built off of the profits of their victims. And, I can't breathe every time I read the news. We can't breathe. The country cannot breathe. And nobody is exempt, no matter what neighborhood you live in, no matter what zip code. But before we talk specifically about the Green New Deal, we need to talk about matters more local. And this is an issue that's affecting many communities and is going to be affecting more communities. So at this time, we're going to quickly talk to a community activist from Brentwood who has been organizing against sprawl and overdevelopment. Like I said, she's an activist, but more importantly, she is a concerned mother. Brentwood, which is on the northern eastern portion of Contra Costa County. Please help me welcome Jovita Mendoza. Jovita, tell us what is happening in Brentwood.
Yeah. So it came to our attention. They wanted to put 3 drills like right on a hill by a little part of our town. And this is actually going to be the second set of 3 drills. They did one set of drills down the road and the county did not communicate to anyone in the area. So this would be the second set of 3, and it's just way too close to the kids. We have, there's a lot of kids in this neighborhood. It's just not the right thing to do to the land. We want to keep it agricultural and open. If you've ever been to Brentwood, that's what we're about. It's a corn town and a cherry town, and that's what people come for, produce. So we want to keep it that way, and we don't want drilling in our backyard. Actually, in anyone's backyard, but I mean, this happens to be here today.
Who are the companies that are...
if you want...
Yeah, go ahead.
So you're asking the companies. It's Power Drive from Indiana, along with a local company, which is the Nunn family. They're the ones that are drilling for oil that have the rights to drill. And again, I'm just a mom. I sell wine for a living, so I really don't know all the details. But what I do know is it's just not right. And we need to find a way to stop it. They're the ones that are drilling for oil that have the. Do
you know if there's any water tables in that area that are endangered by this drilling?
So yeah, and my understanding is all of our water comes from aquifers. So it is very close to our water source in Brentwood. So that's something else we're very concerned about, is what's going to incident here with our water more. So we are asking the county to deny the permits, and we're asking them even before that. It's like, do all the studies. You just can't carte blanche say, oh yeah, sure, nothing to see here, go ahead and approve those, because there was a negative declaration saying that everything was good to go, and we're saying it's not, and they need to do the work. And I haven't done this. Shoshana and the Sunflower Alliance have been amazing. Like, they're the ones that have really helped us and educated us on the consequences to our lives and just the community as a whole by having drills.
Right. And this would seem to be a nonpartisan issue. Nobody wants to drink poisoned water by drilling, or nobody wants to breathe poison air. Tell me about the coalition that you've been forming around this issue locally.
So it was just a bunch of neighbors. We wanted to find a way to share information because, again, none of us are experts. So I built a Facebook group on like a late Thursday night a couple weeks ago. And I think we have about 520 people or so now in the group sharing information. So it's been really nice. And we're lucky in Brentwood. Things don't seem to be so bipartisan, even though we are different political groups. We had, like you said, we had a developer who wanted to develop on farmland about 2,400 homes. And again, bipartisan, people didn't want it. There's another developer that wants to build homes, and it's again on capped oil wells, and they actually want to build a school on a capped oil well. And so after this, that's probably going to be the next thing that we tell our city council they got to look into.
And is this, I think you told me earlier that this is not a city council issue. This is more something about that is in the purview of the county supervisor.
Correct. So this is right on the edge of the Brentwood border. On the other side is county land. So it's the board of supervisors in the county. And I don't exactly know who decides it, but it's not anyone in our city. Our city's actually sending a letter of their concerns, including the water issue that you mentioned. And our city council person, Karen Rary, is also sending her letter of concern. I haven't heard anything from our other council members, which is pretty disappointing.
What stage are we at now?
Right now is just public comment. So anyone who has public comments, public concerns, should to the county with their concerns as to by June 9th.
Emails to the county supervisor,
Yep.
and which is Diane Burgess, who is I think would be amenable. I think she would listen. But we have to express our concerns. So go ahead, and is there anything else that another action that we can take away? Emails to the county supervisor. What else?
Yeah, to the city and to the county planner. Her name is Sid. And if you go to No Drilling in Brentwood Facebook page, you can find Sid's email of where you've got to send your correspondence.
Give me that. Give me your webpage one more time.
It's the Facebook group No Drilling in Brentwood.
Facebook is the greatest political organizer since political organizing.
Yeah, it's helped us a ton. That's how we beat the developer building homes. So we got our Facebook group together and our next door groups together, and we beat them once. So we're hoping we'll beat them again.
I think you will. Jovita Mendoza, thank you so much for joining us. So now we're going to talk about the Green New Deal. Specifically, what we're going to be pushing for is the Bay Area Green New Deal. And building the Bay Area Green New Deal is going to include all of you, every environmental organization, every frontline community, every indigenous community, every concerned citizen. And we have to do this on the local level because, frankly, we do not have a champion for the Green New Deal right now running as candidate for president. This is the most, as I said, this is the most important legislative proposal in the last 30 years. It is a program for justice to create the economy of the future. And the Green New Deal is the only rational response to the crisis that we're facing now. And we're going to be coming out of a pandemic into a world with over 35% unemployment, into a world where Flint, Michigan still doesn't have clean water. That's not a rational world. And yes, the Green New Deal, we talk about renewables, clean energy, zero carbon emissions. These are part of that conversation, but it is also about housing, transportation, healthcare, and social justice. So why are we taking it to the local level? Why the Bay Area Green New Deal? People say, isn't there a bill in the Assembly? California Green New Deal. No, there is not. And this is what everyone needs to know. It's been a little slow getting around in activist circles, but there is no longer any California Green New Deal in the Assembly. The Assembly bill has been gutted. It no longer exists. So that's why the Bay Area must lead on this. If we can't do it here, if we can't do it now, then the entire nation is in a seriously bad place. Because California, and specifically the Bay Area, we are like the pace car for the rest of the nation. So when we lag behind, the rest of the nation lags behind. And so this is why we are mobilizing now. And if that sounded gloomy, I hope it isn't, because we are going to do this. And we're going to do this with your help. And I couldn't be more excited to hear from the speakers that are going to be speaking this evening and to lead us through the discussion. I'm very pleased to hand over the reins to the person who very much organized not only this meeting, but also animated the conversation and the mobilization for the Bay Area Green New Deal. She is an environmental scientist. She's affiliated with McGill University, which is in Montreal, Canada. Her main focus is on issues of water, and she's working on issues with the Great Lakes. She's worked on projects with the EU. She is a Sierra Club director. We are now very proud to have her as a board member for our Revolution Contra Costa, Dr. Jovita Mendoza. Dr. Jovita.
All right, thank you so much, Mark. That was a really nice introduction. I appreciate it. I'm very happy that we have this call tonight. Our first speaker is an amazing person. His name is Mark Stemen. He is a Chico State professor in geography and planning and a guru of all things green. At Chico State, Mark teaches environmental and civic engagement courses. And he is a tireless advocate for sustainability, something that he incorporates in everything that he does, both on campus as well as off campus. For example, under his supervision, his students completed greenhouse gas inventories for the university, for community colleges, and the city of Chico. He's also the executive director of Each One, Teach One, of Northern California, which is a new nonprofit, community nonprofit that focuses on leadership development around issues of sustainability. And he and his students recently developed the Chico Green New Deal, which is why we have him here, because we want to pick his brain, his brilliant brain, on how he did this. So Mark Stemen, welcome. It's so great to have you with us.
It's great to be there virtually.
Hi, I know. So Mark, just shoot straight in. I would really like to find out from you what your elevator pitch is for the Green New Deal. Pretend that I am a voter who has no idea what the Green New Deal is. And tell me, why is the Green New Deal important for us here in California and the rest of the world?
Well, I think most of us have heard a lot of this. I mean, the Green New Deal is a comprehensive plan to combat climate change while also creating millions of new jobs for a post-carbon economy. I think it's important because for far too long, I think we've been told to, change our light bulbs or plant a tree when we fly or, turn off our lights for an hour every year. But that was always the same. It was like we were showing people how to change without really changing anything. And the Green New Deal is actually a plan at the scale to address the scale of the climate emergencies and the problems we face. But it's also a recognition that climate isn't our only problem. However, we are currently witnessing a deep unraveling of American life, accelerated rapidly now by the pandemic and the protests. And this is really hitting youth and people of color the hardest. So the Green New Deal is also a plan to decarbonize the economy while also making that economy fairer and more just. And so I think that's just kind of the overall understanding of this kind of plan. I worked on the City of Chico Green New Deal. My students wanted to do it for the university. And I'll talk in a minute about how it's fairly easy to think about how you would do it in a city. There's a federal policy, but there's nothing for universities. And so really had to go deep down into kind of what were the guiding principles that started the Green New Deal, what were the founding kind of thoughts of the Green New Deal, and get to that as well as to try to figure out, okay, what would it look like for a university? And so if you look at the original resolution, I mean, they got 5 basic goals. They want to achieve achieve zero greenhouse gases through a fair and just transition. They want to create millions of new jobs, invest in infrastructure and industry, secure clean air and water and climate and resilience, and promote justice and equality in all of these areas. And so I think it's important to think about how we would do that. And it's empowering in that it's so comprehensive. And I think that's what really also is politically empowering. Because I think you could take that out on the streets today and say that Green New Deal can help solve the problems that we are facing right now tonight on the streets. And that opens up a whole new coalition of people to be able to push this kind of forward. So that's my elevator pitch for a really tall building. But that's what I'd start off with.
Oh, fantastic. You know, the Green New Deal, of course, does not only address climate change. It is all about social and environmental justice. But when it comes to environmental challenges, the environmental challenges in California, especially in Northern California, are quite unique. And I would like to hear from you how the sort of the California wildfires forebode what the future looks like living with the climate crisis here in Northern California.
So, I think you would ask originally, if I remember right, what are unique challenges do we have? And I don't think our challenges are necessarily unique. We share a lot of the same fire type topography as Australia, for example, which is not really making me happy to think about. We share a lot of the same water circulations with the Mediterranean, which is an even more happy to think about when you think about North Africa, right? So water and fire are two issues that we're going to have to deal with as well. But I think the big one that's going to get us, and the one that we need to think most about, is simply the heat, the extreme heat that we're going to be facing. And it's something that's going to be affecting us all. It's in some sense the universal problem. And it's also the one that we're not prepared for in the least. If you think down in the Bay Area and Costa Conte, I've been involved with a lot of folks down there thinking about sea level rise and all of the problems with that. But y'all don't have air conditioning either. And it's going to get really hot and you're just not prepared for it. And I think the thing about extreme heat is probably the one that we need to be preparing for and be thinking about. And at that level, it really is a local phenomenon that we could be working on locally and to think about that. But we are going to be faced with wildfires. As you know, I'm here in Chico, and so I've been inundated and had to have the effects and live with the effects of the campfire. But also had to deal with the evacuees coming out of Redding with the Carr Fire. We're centrally located in that respect. And so we're going to have more wildfires, and they're going to be bigger. And we're going to have to prepare for both refugees, disruption both as economic and social, and prepare for refugees and prepare for shortages. I mean, that's something to be thinking about as we move forward, that there will be disruptions in our economic supplies in ways that we've now recognized globally, but they'll also be regional in that respect. So be thinking about those types of disruptions and what we could be thinking about and dealing with in that result is something that I think we need to think of as well.
Right. So you already pointed out a little bit after my first question how you developed the Chico Green New Deal with your students. But could you tell us a little bit more about the Chico Green New Deal, how it was created, and most importantly, how you organized for it?
Well, it wasn't really a small group who really drafted it. I think if you look at the original, as I was mentioning, it's pretty easy to model. I think the key, though, in thinking about this, and it was the hardest to really get across to folks here, was the economic plans and to address that, systematic injustices that we're thinking about. One of the authors of this and one of the architects of this, Evan Weber, said it best. I think he said, we need to connect the Green New Deal to the economic pain people are feeling right now, and so many people are already feeling. And show them that there's a better way, a way to build a better economy and improve their lives through climate action. So this idea that tying it to the economics really broadens the base, and I think that's the important aspect about it. So we focused on here at Chico, we focused on 4 things. I mean, you really want to focus on like the Green New Deal, you want to focus on the things you're already doing, just be doing them in a comprehensive manner. And so there's the Green New Deal wants to upgrade all of the U.S. buildings throughout the country. And so we focused on upgrading all of the buildings in the city. It's an easy one to focus on. It's lots of grants actually to do that. So this was an area so they could figure out exactly what they were spending and where they were spending it. To try to move to renewable power. We in Chico are now, in Butte County, are now part of a community choice aggregation. And one of the things about a community choice aggregation is that you can not only do better with it financially and climate-wise, but you can scale it to any level of renewables you want. We're going to be starting around 30% renewables, which is the state required average, but you could have 100% renewables. And so it's easy enough to say in the plan that you, through community choice aggregation, will move to 100% renewable energy by 2030. That is an easily doable plan. Will we? I mean, it's a political fight, but it is not a technological hurdle that we have to overcome. One of the big issues is trying to get rid of the greenhouse gases from transportation. And so really focusing and trying to get into the bus and transportation systems in a much more meaningful way. One of the things about the transportation law in California is it's really based on, you can either think about it, you can either do it on coverage or ridership, you know, and try to get more and more people on the bus would reduce greenhouse gases, that's ridership. But the laws are really written for coverage, for the transit dependent. And so most of the bus lines are really spread out and they're not necessarily geared towards what we would think about getting greenhouse gas production, especially here in the rural counties. So focusing on that was a big aspect of it as well. And then lastly was the job part. We got a lot of people in this county that don't have jobs. We just lost a town, and employment is a huge issue. And so attacking the job aspect of it through renewable energy, Grid Alternatives is a great company up here that's working. They're all over the state, and they do low-income retrofits, and they also train as part of that. So it's a job training as well. So those are kind of the parts that we put together to try to say, okay, this would be what a Chico Green New Deal would look like, and the things that we could push forward. And it's, by doing so, I think it's got great resonance all across the board.
Right. So has it been primarily you and your students spearheading the development of the Chico Green New Deal, and have you built like a local coalition?
We started small, you know, it's that people putting it together, but then we have built a coalition of allies around it. 350 was the first really ally. It was Chico 350, it's now Butte 350. But they were an ally, and they had been, the 350 organization had been putting across the state climate emergency declarations. And so we were, one of the things that we could help our elected officials is they were hesitant to slide onto an emergency declaration that they couldn't fulfill, but we could show them the same policies in the Chico Green New Deal actually solve those climate emergency problems. We got in with other allies. The Butte Environmental Council is wanting to see more climate action here in this community. As I mentioned, Grid Alternatives with their job training. And then we were able to get the Vice Mayor, Alex Brown, to champion it, to be our champion for this. And she ended up taking it on and writing the plan that most of you, if you've seen it around, the actual document is her product.
Right. So, you know, just to sort of pick your brains on others who want to do something similar and fight for, you know, developing a Green New Deal for the Bay Area or other, you know, cities or places in the United States. So how does the success with the Chico Green New Deal inform other communities in California and beyond on how to do this? Lessons learned and tips that you have for us on how to begin and how to make this a success, but also maybe to avoid certain mistakes or certain challenges that you have faced?
Well, I think you've already well down the road. The first thing is start early. We started in the election cycle. And so this is, you know, a plan that kind of came together in 2019, started in 2016 in the first election cycles, and, you know, working on the folks then. And in some sense, getting a good understanding of the problems that we were going to face. And so then we were very active in 2018, and we wanted to see climate plans, and we wanted to see kinds of actions from anybody that we were going to be supporting. We came up with some plans. I mean, I think it's important to have some idea of what it is roughly that you want politicians to do, what you want others to do, and have them just sitting there. You know, in cases of emergency, what gets done is what's planned. And so if there's a plan already put together to be able to put in front of somebody. If there's one key, I think, that most people overlook when thinking about this is the need to get into the budget cycle of whatever entity that you're talking about. We were eventually, one of our goals was to create a climate action commission. We had a kind of a task force that the city had, and we wanted to have a full commission, but a full commission needs staffing. They just don't go up and create new things with a whole bunch of staff load. You're going to get a whole lot of staff members upset about that. And we were aware of that as our discussions in 2016. So in 2018, our goals were not only a climate action commission, but a staff position. We wanted a staff position because we knew that that would be supportive of the people inside the building. The staff and the city manager and folks did not want to see more overworked staff. So if the council was willing to cough up some money for another staff position, that made it much more acceptable in the House. But we, of course, knew that we were never going to get a whole staff position, so we only asked for half and then dangled the other half looking for an ally. And we had housing was a big issue here because of the campfire, and so we got a position half climate action, half housing. So I think that's an important aspect that a lot of folks don't think about. And then lastly, it's the hard thing is you just got to wait for your right timing. Campfire was perfect. It was a climate emergency that rained down upon us and overwhelmed our town. And we then had plans in place. We had budgeting moving forward, and that was easy then to tap into that. And so hold a press conference as soon as you can because the news cycle moves on. You know, the campfire was the greatest disaster in American history. And wait, what? Who, what, can't what? I mean, it's gone. And so know that your timing is not going to be that long. And so be ready to move when you can.
All right, good. That's fantastic. I'm kind of curious also from your perspective, now that we don't have a champion running anymore as a presidential candidate for the Green New Deal, and the one that we did have has suspended his campaign. What does the fight look like under a Biden presidency, and what does the fight look like under a Trump presidency?
Well, the fight looks better under a Biden presidency than a Trump presidency, but Bernie would have been the best. But it gets back to local. A lot of greenhouse gases are actually produced locally, and they're under control of the local jurisdictions. So the federal government has major play in financing a lot of this stuff and the investments that we need in a lot of these things. Some of the early ideas of the Green New Deal that most people don't think about is investment in a lot of alternative energy. And there was a lot of it done in 2008 and 2010 to try to coming out of the financial crisis. And everyone remembers Solyndra, the fail, and everyone forgets that Tesla was funded out of that. And this idea that we just got a rocket just launched the moon from something that was funded out of the recovery of an environmental problem. I mean, right? So this is this opportunity that we have. The federal government can do things like that, but when we're talking about where we're going to build a road, that's the local planning commission. And what are we going to do about local power? What are we going to do? A lot of this is local, and so. While the big pictures in the federal government may not look as good, the local scene looks great. And I can tell you that there is no better place to be a climate activist than California. And so in California, we should be, as Mark said, leading the charge because we can and we have the abilities to do so.
All right, thank you so much. So, you touched upon it a little bit already, but with very likely no federal support under Biden or Trump, how do you see us realize a local and regional Green New Deals from the bottom up?
Well, one of the first things I would suggest as being Californians is to get informed. And as you know, as mentioned before, I do most of my work in climate forecasting and using the state forecasting tool. It's real easy. It's called CalAdapt. It's cal-adapt.org, caladapt.org. And you can model climate by zip code. And so people go and model it. It's mainly a planning tool. It was made for planners, but anybody can do it. And so get to know what you can and can't think about your local area. The reason it was written for planners is because California state law now requires every municipality to create a climate vulnerability assessment, SB 379. And so the first step is to get your community to do a climate vulnerability assessment. We found that it was really, keep telling them the climate's going to be bad and pointing to someplace else didn't really move our local officials. But when we could point to what was happening locally, that was a powerful indicator. And so doing a climate vulnerability assessment, which is required by state law. The state has also put together, because it's California, like I said, a program called Civic Spark, which is an AmeriCorps program, which puts recent college graduates in communities to do this kind of work. And they're right now fired up on vulnerability assessments and climate action plans 2.0, as they call them, CAP 2.0, because we're now in the second round of doing these. So local communities can tap into that. It's AmeriCorps. That means you only have to pay half of what it costs because it's a federal subsidized program. And you can get these people into your planning staff who is desperate for more help and often desperate for expertise. A lot of these programs, there's also one called Climate Corps, which is actually based out of the Bay Area, is a great another one. And they have fellows, and they have dozens and dozens of them that interact with each other. And so you get this pool of talent that you could work in a local community. So, I mean, those are a couple of things. We've used those. I mean, that's been very effective for us, is these programs. We're not a rich little town, and so being able to say that we can get half of the staff, you know, a small staff person paid by the state has been really attractive, and that got us down the road to then saying, okay, now we need to actually pay somebody. And so that would be a path that I would encourage any of the small communities to think about.
Oh my gosh, so much valuable information. Thank you. I have only one more question for you, Mark, and that is, I'm really curious, where are you now with the Chico Green New Deal, and what are your big plans and actions for the coming year?
Well, we've created a climate action commission. We had one meeting. We've suspended meetings, and so we're now to essential meetings. And so it's horrid in that everything has, in some sense, paused and stopped in this. As I mentioned, we hired a new staff member who's then in charge of this commission. We're in the process of writing our second CAP. We've identified as, you know, one of the big fights to think about in this is what are your dates and what are your targets? And so we got them to agree to climate neutrality by 2045. If it doesn't get to climate neutrality by any date, you're never going to get there. So we were willing to take any date as long as we got to neutrality, and then we can make it faster. But if you don't plan for neutrality, you're never going to get there. We're in the community choice aggregation. We've been pushing unsuccessfully to have, when you join the community choice aggregation, you're entered into the standard low pool of the minimum required for renewables, which I think is 30 or 33% as an opt-in. Under the understanding that nobody opts in and nobody opts out, our idea is just to opt in everybody at 100% and let them opt out of that to go to a lower number. We're still pretty conservative up here. They're not willing to go for that one, but that's a thought, is that, you know, trying to get this people to opt in. Nobody ever opts out of stuff. I mean, nobody's giving up any of their Netflix stuff right now. They've forgotten all of those apps that they're paying for. All this stuff you forget about once you do it. So it's really important to opt in at the highest level possible and then have people kind of opt out from there. So we're working on that as our choice. And then we have now a job training program with Grid Alternatives, our local community college, in solar installation and energy retrofitting, because it's a big issue up here of the things we're doing. So that's how far we got. We're pretty stalled right now, I want to be honest. We're doing our climate action plan over Zoom, which is really going to be difficult because a big part of the climate action plan is community engagement to convince everybody this is a good idea. And this isn't really the best venue. I mean, it's what we got, but for doing that kind of work. So that's our biggest challenge right now, is how to keep moving forward in a distant, socially distant world.
Thank you, Mark, so much for allowing us to pick your brain and to learn from what you have been doing. I'm really excited to keep following what is happening with the Chico Green New Deal and to keep learning as well from what you are doing. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. It was really nice to see you again.
It was good to see you again.
All right. Thank you, Mark. So I would like to hand the microphone now to Susanna Williams. Susanna is going to talk with Ben Paulos, who is spearheading a sort of a version of the Green New Deal for Berkeley called the Berkeley Climate Action Fund. Susanna Williams is the chair of our Revolution Contra Costa. She is also the district director for the California Democratic Party, the Contra Costa County. She is an e-board rep for AB 11. She has been a super volunteer for Bernie Sanders and works as a marketing and media professional.
So yes, I am here to introduce Ben Paulos to us. Ben is with the Berkeley Energy Commission, He's an environmental consultant. He's worked for Lawrence Berkeley Lab. I cannot talk tonight. East Bay Community Choice, Vote Solar, reports with the UCB researchers, Wisconsin Energy Policy, and he worked for 13 years for the Energy Foundation, focusing on renewable energy and biofuels.
Ben Paulos, and my day job is energy research and consulting. One of my hobbies is serving on the Berkeley Energy Commission, which is one of the 34 citizen commissions that advises the city council here in Berkeley. And one thing I'm trying to get done on the commission is to create a funding stream for climate action. Berkeley has made every proclamation that you can think of. We have a climate action plan that was approved by voters 12 years ago. We have a goal of becoming fossil fuel free. We have declared a climate emergency, but we have never actually put our money behind it. So I want to create a fund. My goal is $5 million a year to support action on climate change. It would be a way to engage citizens in climate solutions rather than allowing someone else to fix the problem for them. And I'm hoping that it would set a precedent for other California cities and other US cities to back up their own climate declarations and plans with some real money. The plan is to raise money through a new tax, which means we have to be on the ballot this fall or possibly in 2022. So the guiding principles, I've developed a set of 4 that people kind of like. The first is to follow the polluter pays principle, to raise the money by taxing pollution. Here in Berkeley, at least, most of our pollution comes from oil in cars and natural gas in buildings. Our electricity system is pretty clean already. We're served by a community choice aggregator, which is getting cleaner, we hope. But really the big problem that is actually getting worse is transportation. And the problem that isn't really going anywhere is gas in buildings. So the second principle is that we have to put equity front and center in this, both in the way we raise the money and in the way we spend it. We have to promote social and environmental justice. Third, we have to be flexible because Berkeley is not an island or a country. We are part of California and things change at the state level. New technologies come on the market. There might be some federal policy changes. So I think it's important that we remain flexible about what we do with the fund. And lastly, this is a public fund. It's the people's money. So we have to be transparent about how it operates. So there are really 2 main questions: how to raise the money and how to spend the money. If we follow the polluter pays principle, the fundraising usually involves cars primarily, and also natural gas. I've collected a sort of list of every idea everyone's had about how to raise money through cars or natural gas. The ones that have floated to the top have been a tax on gasoline distributors and increasing the utility users tax that actually not all of us, but most cities in California charge a utility tax on gas, electricity, broadband, and water. And then the third one that's floated to the top is Uber and Lyft, the ride service companies who are largely taking their riders out of transit. We don't have time to dig through all of this table, but this was a concept we developed to think about the trade-offs of all of these fundraising ideas. Some raise more money than others. Some create an incentive for carbon reduction by themselves. Some have different equity implications or easy or legal, easy to administer or legal or not legal. And then there are different effects like how much opposition is going to be raised from corporate interests to these things. How much money will they spend on fighting it? So when you think about if you want to do this in your community, this is sort of a matrix for how to think about the pros and cons of each of the fundraising options. And then there's deciding how to spend the money. the first thing I hear from people when I talk about this is, wow, I really want to spend the money on X or Y. And I realized after a while that instead of just talking about what to spend the money on, we should talk about how to decide what to spend the money on. And I'm imagining sort of I don't know if this is the right approach, we'll leave it to further discussion. I'm imagining sort of a community foundation approach where people make proposals and a panel of experts rates the proposals on some very clearly defined criteria. Like, how does this score on how many tons of carbon does it reduce? How cost effective is it? Does it create jobs? And what's the equity impact of it? So to illustrate that, I came up with these two imaginary proposals. One is to pay for putting electric car chargers at the Whole Foods parking lot. The other is to hire a local group here in the East Bay called Rising Sun, which does job training programs to educate and hire youth to do installation on elderly affordable housing. That sort of rings all the bells on equity, so they get a perfect 10 score on that. And that puts them over the top in this comparison. And you can imagine, a couple dozen different proposals because there are many ways to fight climate change, and running them all through this sort of filter to decide how to spend the money. So there are quite a few challenges and considerations that go into thinking about this. Equity, I already mentioned. We have to decide whether this is a general fund or a dedicated fund, because if it goes on the ballot, they have different hurdles. To win a general fund tax, you only need a majority. For a dedicated fund earmarked to a specific purpose, you need a 2/3 vote. Thinking about opposition for each of these, if we're going to try to tax oil and gasoline, are we going to be buried in opposition funding from Chevron, for example, or the Koch brothers? Probably the biggest elephant in the room right now is the impact of the pandemic and the recession. Will voters support a new tax when the unemployment rate is so high? Timing is a surprisingly complicated issue. This is a presidential year, 2020. My first reaction was, wow, I really want to be on the ballot with Trump, vote no on Trump, vote yes on climate action. They just go together so well. But the turnout is very different in a presidential year versus a non-presidential year. Especially here in Berkeley, we have a very large student population. With the pandemic, the UC may not be in session this fall. We may have thousands of students who might otherwise support this who might not be here. They may be voting absentee or by mail, or maybe not. So there are really quite a few wild cards thrown our way because of COVID. So to get a better sense of that, there is the city is polling voters. They actually just finished polling voters on this question. We just got the results today. They asked about two of the funding options. One was an increase in the utility users tax. The other was a tax on gasoline distributors. The gasoline distributors tax scored really high, something like 75% support. The UUT, the utility tax increase was lower, more like 60%. However, I also learned today that the city now thinks that they don't have the legal authority to tax gasoline distributors. So we have to think about whether we can impose a retail tax at the pump, and whether voters would think differently about that than a tax on a distributor. When you think about a carbon tax to raise money, you have to remember that it's very different than our usual tax measures. We impose property taxes and sales taxes to raise money, not to discourage behavior. We don't want people to stop buying things or buying homes. We just want to raise the money, right, to pay for schools and roads and things. With a carbon tax, the opposite is true. We would love it if people change their behavior to avoid the tax. So when you think about how large the tax should be, is it large enough to have an impact on people, or is it just a small tax that's enough to raise money? I kind of think that the voters, I don't know how aggressive the voters are how eager they are to pay more in taxes. So I'm hoping that a $5 million fund is going to be small enough to get their support, and that we can use the money to spur action, spur their buying patterns and their behavior patterns, and really use the money to help people avoid the tax. That's also a huge factor on the equity side. If we tax a commodity so commonly used as gasoline or natural gas, people of all income levels buy gasoline and natural gas. So how can we, it's hard to avoid an equity impact on a product like that, but we can use the money to alleviate the equity problem. We can direct the money toward low-income households to weatherize their homes or to get rid of their gasoline car, pay for free transit passes, give them rebates for hybrid cars or electric cars. We can build out the bike lane system here in Berkeley that allows everyone to get around town without cars. So there are a lot of ways to address equity in how we spend the money. And I think that's really going to be the key to solving the equity problem. So lastly, people love to talk about climate action. We certainly love it here in Berkeley, but talk is cheap. And I think I'm much more impressed if we actually put some money on the table and start solving the problem locally. All right, and that's my presentation. If you go to the last slide, I have this great photo that I took of there's a student strike last year at my daughter's school here in Berkeley.
Thank you, Ben. That was very informative. A lot of great thought starters in there, a lot of good information. Something kind of popped up. This is a question that we'd actually talked about. A lot of things have happened in the last few days. I heard you mention social and environmental justice with all the protests happening right now, with a fair playing field, racial justice currently being demanded, and rightfully so. Do you see any intersection between what you're doing with environmental justice, and you'd mentioned social justice, between what the protesters are asking for?
Even in Berkeley, we don't have much industry, but there is a correlation between environmental impacted neighborhoods and low-income neighborhoods. South Berkeley, West Berkeley tend to be more polluted, more run down. They tend to be the low-income neighborhoods. They tend to have less access to all of the transportation things that we have in other parts of the city, like the bike share system, for example. We need to make sure the bike lane network goes into all neighborhoods. We need to make sure that they have access to all of these alternative transportation things that we want to support. There is also, as we were already talking about the Green New Deal, there's a huge opportunity in job creation through the Green New Deal. Rising Sun Energy Center is just one example of that here in the East Bay. There are actually quite a few more people employed by the solar industry in America than by the coal industry. Something like 3 times as many people. California has the most solar jobs of any state, about half of all the solar jobs. So, there's a huge job creation opportunity in the Green New Deal. And I think, especially because of the pandemic from COVID, I think that's really going to motivate some people to do job creation programs. I think we're going to see a lot of proposals at the federal level. Whether people want to call it the Green New Deal or not, people are looking at the stimulus program from 2009 that President Obama helped put through, that helped us get out of the recession. I think they're looking at that as a model for recovery from the COVID pandemic.
Great. It sounds like there's a lot of good things that this can do to help with social justice as well. I'm kind of flipping the switch back to funding. You showed us a lot of different funding options. And obviously COVID-19 has literally thrown a grenade into the bunker for a lot of issues out there, a lot of projects. I'm starting to see communities talk about putting a sales tax on the ballot, down the road, counties, that sort of thing. What kind of funding mechanisms do you think within this current environment that we have would be most palatable to a voter? And are you seeing any more interest in a Green New Deal as a result of the pandemic?
So on your first question, what are the the best funding sources? The best funding source is one that voters will support, or that your city council or county board will support, if they're willing to appropriate money. I would love to tax gasoline. That is by far the biggest source of pollution here in Berkeley and in California. It's also where all the money is. A 1 cent tax on gasoline in Berkeley would raise $500,000 a year. So, even a very modest 5 cent tax is, we're halfway to my $5 million goal. I actually am not, I'm not a big fan of general sales taxes or even more property taxes. I think voters are going to hit the wall with property taxes here in Berkeley. We have we have very generous voters, and we have supported so many property tax add-ons that, like, my property tax bill actually needs a second page to include all of the add-ons. We just approved a very large amount of money for schools in March in the primary election through 3 more property taxes. So, everybody's community is going to have a different appetite, different condition for where you're at. The sales tax here in Alameda County is hitting 10%, which is pretty darn high for a regressive tax. So I feel like we need to really target the fundraising as much as possible toward pollution. If we could tax Exxon and Chevron and the Koch brothers, man, I would be all over that. Unfortunately, they are not here. So the gasoline distributors, I thought, was sort of the closest thing to that. Whether we can do it or not legally, I don't know. Another aspect of how this could play out is that there's a lot of interest in Albany, which is right next door to Berkeley. If we postpone to 2022, I can imagine this becoming sort of a county level or Bay Area wide phenomenon. It would give us a lot more time for organizing and education. My hope was that Berkeley would do it first, and we would sort of pioneer, how to do it, and then other people would follow, because that would raise the, comfort level of a lot of other communities. And we may still go ahead. We just have to, decide whether the polling results are strong enough and if our ideas are legal enough. I'm sorry, your second question, I've forgotten what it was already.
I'm sorry, I was just asking also if you were seeing any more interest in a Green New Deal, with what we're seeing with the environmental changes, the positive environmental changes happening, with fewer cars on the road, fewer planes in the air. Yeah,
I don't know, that's really the wild card question right now. This part of my motivation for the climate fund was that the climate change as an issue was so high on the agenda. We had Greta and the school strikes taking over the world. We had all the wildfires from the last 2 years. We had the power shutoffs because of the wildfires in Australia. There's so much pushing climate action that I thought this was a super favorable time. And then the pandemic hit and everything got kind of hit sideways. I don't know, we'll see how long the racial unrest persists, and if that goes through the fall. It's such a crazy time now. I just don't know how voters think exactly. And the fact that the poll results were pretty good today made me feel hopeful that people can deal with more than one crisis at a time. And just to be brutally honest about it, election day is right in the middle of fire season. There's a very good chance we're going to have more fires this fall, or we're going to have power shutoffs to prevent the fires. PG&E is proposing hundreds of megawatts of diesel generators in our communities in case we have power shutoffs. I think all of that's just going to put climate change right back at the top of the agenda, especially if, let's knock on wood, if, you know, infection rates go down and we have some, you know, racial justice come back and things calm down in the rest of our society. So yeah, it's really hard to get this is a hell of an agenda.
Everybody's in the same boat. No one knows what's going to happen. So, well, it sounds like there's a lot of really good energy going out there, a lot of great programs. Some of them, you know, are moving forward. You know, we're hearing about what's happening in Chico, and that's fairly long down the pike. So how can the average person, like, how can I get involved? And how can I help with these efforts, with your efforts, with my community's efforts, get something started in my local community? What can someone do?
Yeah, well, I assume not too many of you are in Berkeley. If you're in Berkeley, call me up. Let's get on it. If not, you know, I think that the idea is that this is a replicable model, and the basis of it is extremely simple. It's great to talk about climate action, but it takes money to act. So you need to put some money on the table. And then, you know, the hard part is figuring out how to get the money in your community. It's probably relatively easier to figure out how to spend the money because that's what people like to talk about and participate in. But really, you know, start researching what the opportunities are. You know, can you do a retail gasoline tax? What is your tax rate for utility users tax? Do you have other unique opportunities? You know, Richmond has a huge oil refinery. That's a big potential funding source. And they've been certainly working on that, but they haven't necessarily directed the money toward climate action in Richmond. They have a lot of other needs. You know, Contra Costa County is full of refineries and industrial operations. They're a really good target. I don't think voters generally like those corporations and those factories and refineries. So if you can figure out a way to, you know, tax them or fee them, I think voters might like that, especially if you can sell it as a way to reduce the need for those refineries and reduce the impacts of those refineries.
Makes sense. Good advice. So thank you so much for coming, and any parting words of wisdom for us? Anything you think we should know? Anything that's worked spectacularly well on your end?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I can talk mostly about Berkeley issues. I mean, I tend to work more on the state level, and the state issues are going to, I mean, as Professor Stemen said, we're quite fortunate we all live in California, but we also have an obligation to keep pushing the envelope here. You know, we are on the front, at the front of the parade in California, but that doesn't mean we're doing enough. Things that happen here happen all over the country and all over the world. So local action can be a way to spur more state action because all state officials are local. So yeah, carry on with the local action and be as aggressive as you can.
Awesome, thank you, great advice. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So back to Vitska, who is going to introduce our next speaker, our final speaker. So Vitska, take it away.
All right, thank you, Susanna. And thank you, Ben, that was fantastic. So our last speaker is somebody I heard speak in February. He gave a presentation on his vision for a Green New Deal. And his presentation was so inspiring that we invited him to be a part of our call now as well. We are very happy that he accepted. His name is Massimo Lambert-Mullen. I hope I pronounced that right. He's an activist gardener and an organizer who is committed to building a livable future where we do not depend on fossil fuels. His work is with the Sunrise Movement, and it has involved training and leading volunteer canvassers during the 2019 San Francisco district attorney race, as well as registering voters, gathering ballots for Bernie Sanders, and coordinating the distribution of emergency COVID-19 relief funds to local nonprofits. Massimo envisions a future where formerly incarcerated folks have opportunities to work in habitat restoration and green energy, and indigenous peoples regain stewardship of lands that were stolen from their ancestors. Massimo, thank you so much for being here with us again.
I'm really honored to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really grateful for the other speakers, for Ben, for Jovita, for Mark. Mark is a huge inspiration for me. I studied geography at Humboldt State, and seeing him speak the first time at Antioch really blew me away as well. So it was wonderful to hear him speak again. And yeah, just want to thank everyone for being here. It's really wonderful to see people coming from rural communities like Brentwood and Chico, and people coming from urban communities like Berkeley, and having us all together. And I think if we're going to achieve a Green New Deal, it has to be through collaboration with urban and rural communities. It can't just, we can no longer be separate.
Thank you for being here. And, I actually have only one question for you. What a world looks like with the Green New Deal, and why we must fight for that world. So your vision for a Green New Deal.
Yeah. So my vision for a Green New Deal in the Bay Area is a bit utopian. So I'll just jump into that. So in the future, I imagine a Richmond with wind turbines instead of refineries. I imagine a delta that is enjoyed by salmon and steelhead as much as summertime boaters. And I imagine villages of tiny homes in Berkeley instead of highway-side encampments. In Oakland, I imagine high rises with vertical gardens and urban farms off 7th Street that continue to cultivate Black-owned businesses. I imagine pedestrian walkways from Fruitvale to Hayward, and electric buses that buzz with conversation, at least when the pandemic is over. In San Francisco, I imagine parades on Market Street past buildings that house the formerly homeless. I imagine a future with no oil. So we gotta for fighting so hard for that. And in San Francisco, I imagine a city with canals as well as seawalls. So how do we get there? We get there by organizing our communities. And that's a huge value, and one of the fundamental values of the Sunrise Movement is we talk to our communities. We engage with people across generational boundaries, across racial boundaries, across gender boundaries. We engage everyone we can and tell them about a Green New Deal. And so that's a big thing. And so how do we organize our community? Through climate strikes. We've already been doing that. We can keep doing that. Through community farming, that's a huge one for me as someone who works as a gardener and the contractor, really focused on getting people to have more edibles. That's a huge thing for me, and seeing amazing existing organizations like Place in Oakland, Urban Tilth, Canticle Farms, and Alamany Farms in San Francisco, seeing community farms, and that's just naming a few, that have really focused on serving frontline communities and have really focused on providing job opportunities for formerly incarcerated folks. So to me, I kind of want to go back to kind of chime into conversation that Ben and Susanna were having about, bringing together social justice and climate justice. And I see them as being totally compatible. the campaign I mentioned, the district attorney race that I was working for Chesa Boudin, that was the first candidate that Sunrise Bay Area endorsed as a climate justice organization. And his focus was on immigrants' rights. His focus was on getting, falsely convicted people out of prison. But we also understand that, there's going to be more climate refugees coming, and we cannot criminalize them for wanting to have a home in the United States. And there hopefully are going to be more people being released from prisons who were wrongfully convicted because of racial bias in the police, because of unfair drug laws. And if we can fix that system, what I'd really love to see the Green New Deal do and push for is providing opportunities for those formerly incarcerated folks. So yeah, that's organizing our communities, pushing our politicians like we've done with Sunrise, continuing to elect progressives. We're really close to an endorsement on the Jackie Fielder and Scott Wiener race in San Francisco. And yeah, pushing for candidates like Jackie Fielder who are committed to climate justice, who was there at Standing Rock, and who is committed to housing justice because she's lived out of her van. So having people who've really lived those experiences, and pressuring moderate candidates to commit to a Green New Deal. I mean, like we've all talked about in this conversation, it is really a disappointment not to have a climate champion. It's made it hard personally for me to be motivated to organize like I was earlier this year. But that's not it. We also have to push moderate politicians and push our family members and our friends to support a Green New Deal, regardless of what their political background is. And then another thing is standing in solidarity. I mean, looking at what's going on right now on the streets with the curfew and everything, we have to understand that all these issues are intertwined. And, we're not going to have, at least in my opinion, we're not going to have a Green New Deal if we're not fighting for Black lives and we're not going to mobilize the frontline communities that we are claiming to fight for, unless we stand in solidarity with them in any way we can. And yeah, right now with COVID, it's not just protesting on the street, it's also, donating to bail funds. There's a lot we can do across the board, but we have to show that solidarity with organizations that are focused on social justice more so than climate justice, because they have to understand that we take their issues, their oppression by the state seriously. So yeah, standing in solidarity and learning our history, building our future. That is a huge one for me. I think a lot of what I see in a Green New Deal, even, looking at this poster here, and thinking about the New Deal, thinking about the Green New Deal as a revitalization of the New Deal, we have to look into the past. We have to look at moments when protesters, when activists, when people from all walks of life have come together and have fought and have achieved, everything we have today. So much of that is thanks to labor unions. Steve Ongerth left, but he's an amazing labor organizer. So it's awesome to have people like that on board. So this slide I really love. It's Mona Carone, or this mural I really love. It's Mona Carone, who lives in San Francisco, and it's basically a mural of Market Street in different moments throughout history. So starting at the beginning, you see the Bloody Thursday waterfront strike, and then you see a May Day where everyone is marching like there's a pandemic going on. Looks like they're doing great social distancing. Pushing forward past a couple, you see the Gay Pride Parade of the 80s, the original Gay Pride, the anti-war protest, and then you see the future. So that last furthest right part of the slide is what I really want to focus on, because it is a beautiful utopian vision. And like any utopian vision, it's not necessarily a reality, but looking at the past, looking at these moments where we have fought and where we have achieved things, like, LGBT rights, looking at pride, where we have achieved things like having a weekend, having a 40-hour work week, through unions, and having fair pay across the board. These are all fights that we have already had, and that we need to continue. Even looking at civil rights and Black Lives Matter, it's like, no matter how far we get, we're gonna have to keep pushing. So looking at the past is really powerful to me, and remembering the past, not so easily forgetting, like Mark was mentioning with the campfire. We have to remember these moments and why we're fighting. And so, yeah, in the future, I see fragments of the past. I see achievements quickly forgotten, advancements quietly disposed by monopolies and dictators. I see a time when we are unified but localized. I see a time when our solidarity is bonded into the law books, and when our activism both feeds our communities and empowers them to stand against oppression. I see a future where everyone is allowed to breathe. So yeah, greener Bay Area. I love this map to the right. It's from Rebecca Solnit's Infinite City, which is a beautiful atlas of San Francisco and the Bay Area. And this shows all of the different green spaces and women activists who've fought hard for those green spaces in the Bay Area. And so what I really love about thinking about this map, thinking about the history of the Bay Area is one, how much we have achieved as a region, as a metropolis, through the activism of really amazing, strong women. And so I am so grateful to come from a matriarchal place of activism, and come from a place where women have fought so hard and have really achieved amazing things. So many of the women and people who inspire me to this day as an activist, people like Dariah Robinson of Urban Tilth, people like Penny Opal Plant of I Don't Know More, are badass women of color who've been fighting their entire lives to push for essentially a Green New Deal. And so we have to, acknowledge that history and keep pushing forward into the future. So with transportation, like I said before, really taking this opportunity to maybe close off some roads, making those urban spaces remain for bikes and pedestrians, and continue pushing large thoroughfares to really just prioritize buses over everything, because that's shown throughout the world to be massively beneficial. Housing and green building, that was touched on by a couple of people. We need more affordable housing. We have a massive homelessness problem, and we need to build greener. As someone who has worked in construction and has seen how little regard there is in that industry for the most part for really environmental concerns, it needs to improve. Fossil fuels, we need to keep fighting to keep coal out of Oakland. The coal port story has continues to be a very difficult fight, and the city continues to get its legal challenges overturned. So we need to just keep fighting and keep pressuring in every way we can, through direct action, through reaching out to our local governments and courts in Oakland, and throughout the Bay Area. We have to keep fighting for that. And like Mark mentioned at the beginning, we have to be the example as the Bay Area, but we also have to learn from other places that have done an amazing job. We have to learn from cities like Medellin in Colombia that have established amazing public transit and bus routes that have massively reduced traffic and massively reduced greenhouse gas emissions. So we have to look, you know, across the world. We have to recycle more like Sweden, and we have to, you know, use buses like Colombia. And we have to look across the world, not just at wealthy countries, but countries in the global south too, who've been achieving amazing things, pushing for better public transit, pushing for more green energy, pushing for microgrids even. So COVID-19, like we're all feeling, it has been an incredibly difficult time to organize. It's hard for me, very much so, to be inspired when I'm not physically in a room with my comrades, with my fellow activists, with my mentors. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. It's been very difficult to organize, but it's also an unprecedented opportunity. And so much, you look at the Green New Deal, came out of the Great Depression. And what scares me right now, what I'm sure scares a lot of other people too, is looking at the way it's going right now. It feels like we're on the fence and we have to walk forward, but it just keeps getting thinner. And on either side, just doesn't look really pretty. So we need to keep pushing forward in this scary time. And we need to protest in the ways that we safely can. And we need to rise from the ashes. And out of this, like the previous speakers mentioned, locally improving our transportation systems, locally improving our energy and trade systems. And yeah, I do believe we have to fix our criminal justice system. And that has to be a part of it. And we have to show up in solidarity with that. And supporting food sovereignty. I think it's really an amazing thing that's come out of this is people have been creating edible gardens at an unprecedented level. And we need to continue to roll in that direction and share our food with our neighbors who might not have a backyard space to grow food. Yeah, so last slide. Yeah, so I think right now, you know, we have to stand in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. I'm glad that most of the people I know at Sunrise are absolutely doing that. And I went to a car rally the other day and saw 3 or 4 people I know from climate activism. So it's beautiful to see that. And then if there's time, I have like a 2-minute poem I'd like to share and close with that. Would that be okay? Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. This is a poem I wrote a while ago. Fossil fuel is cancer. It runs beneath her skin, sometimes shallow, sometimes deep. From tar sands cuts to her cavernous stomach below, oil and gas are natural, harmless cells of Earth's body. Left alone, these cancers of ancient death are benign, but the agitating needles of fracking rigs and derricks catalyze their malignance. As these tumors are peeled from her body and released into the atmosphere, she begins to cough. Her golden brown skin is diagnosed with lymphoma, unable to support life in her follicles after decades. Pancreas is rendered useless, allowing the sludge of mines and pools of oil to seep into the intestinal passages of shrinking aquifers. Her esophagus can no longer digest toxic waste as its burning tumors thicken within her throat. She can barely scream to protest on a cosmic operating table with no attending nurse. Her cervix can no longer bring life, and her voiceless children are slowly becoming extinct, choking on plastic and crude oil. It is not enough to wear rainbow ribbons, to slap Keep Tahoe blue stickers on bumpers. It is not enough to send our thoughts and prayers, to listen to a few Greta Thunberg speeches and take shorter showers. The only cure is our choice to harness the resources that she willingly provides. As she lies upon her earthen bed, we need to purify her smoke-laden breath, her poisoned waters and fallow soil. It is our collective decision to bring medicine to her dried lips with the energy of tides, bring fresh air to her lungs by harnessing winds to cure her skin with sunlight. We must bring down the concrete dams that act as tumors in her breasts, making it impossible to feed fresh-flowing rivers and nurse the young salmon. We cannot let her die, for we drink her milk and inhale as she exhales. We must nurse our mother. She must survive.
I am so inspired again by everything that you have said. Thank you. I was not born and raised here in the United States, and I've only lived in the Bay Area for the last 2 years. But I've met so many inspiring and wonderful people, and so although we are finding ourselves in a really dark time, I'm also excited to see the people that are standing up and doing what's right. And you are certainly one of those people. So thank you for being here. And thank you to everybody else as well. Mark Stemen, Ben Paulos, fantastic human beings. Thank you for all that you're doing. And I hope that I can continue to learn from all of you.
Thanks, Vitska. Yeah, I want to introduce Gordon Miller. Gordon's been helping us out in chat and on Facebook with questions. So Gordon, what do we have in the way of questions?
The question I'm looking for it is, should the Green Deal include building a circular economy, reducing food waste, restoring healthy forests, waterways, soils, and wildlife populations? It's to all speakers.
So who wants to take it first? Massimo, Mark, Ben?
I can chime in. I think it absolutely needs to be a circular economy. I think that's really, in my mind, that is the best way that we can heal our earth and revitalize our soils, our waters, and our winds.
And I guess I would chime in, and if you do go and read the resolution, there is a talk about agriculture and the need to improve farming and keep farmers on the land, and to improve the soil and health of farms and the food. So I think it's part of it. I don't know that it's not. So
awesome. So anybody have any last minute questions they want to pop into chat? Not seeing any. So thank you, everyone. Mark, Ben, Massimo, your poem was awesome. Thank you. That was great. So thank you, everybody, for coming. We're trying to do these on a regular basis. This is our second event. First one was focused on single-payer healthcare, Medicare for all, covered the Green New Deal, and we have an exciting new event coming up for you. So save the date on your calendars. Join us for our next live stream on June 16th. 7 p.m. It'll be a Zoom/Facebook event again. And this one we will be discussing keeping money out of politics. We will have speakers Lawrence Abbott, Trent Lang, Michelle Sutter, and come find us on Facebook and join us for the next event. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for supporting Black Lives Matter. Do what you can. You do not have to go to the front lines. There's lots of things you can do behind the scenes. Donate bail money. Please donate bail money. They're going to need it. And thank you, everyone. And anybody else have any last thoughts? If not, we will wrap it up and say goodnight.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Massimo and Ben and everybody else.